So welcome everybody to the week two go to session. And by the way, if I know that we've been having some trouble with recording the last couple of months with the go to sessions, but I mean, if you um are not able to, like, what I'll do is I'm gonna actually put on the go to session right tonight, like, right after this session. I'll put this on the announcements. But if you can't access that, then you can always go to our, just go to our archives. Um, but basically, though, tonight, what I want to kind of do is go through our project two. Now, first of all, um, by the way, you guys did a really great job on project one. Um, so if you haven't had a chance to check out the comments on that for you online students, just go ahead and click on the score. But I mean, pretty much, I mean, everybody did a really, really fantastic job. I was really, really kind of blown away. And so what we're going to do for this week, though, for project two, is that we are going to go ahead and assume that your project one, was fantastic, right? And you need to kind of get the agent's attention, right? And how do you get the agent's attention, right? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, right? So first of all, actually, we don't even have a slide presentation for the for this particular go-to session, but I just want to go through the appendix in the textbook, right? So this is actually on page 94. It starts on page 94. And I'm going to go ahead here and show you some student examples that we've had in the past couple of months. But let's talk a little bit about project two. So those of you that are on the film side, you know, we talk about how to write a film treatment. And now here's the thing. This is where I kind of have to give you sort of a preliminary kind of, not necessarily a warning, but the fact is that if you do a film treatment, and by the way, I'm actually doing this for one of my classes at UCF right now, um, because I'm actually taking a screenwriting class. But when you do this for real, the fact is that a lot of times the agent is going to have different kind of specifications. So in other words, like, so one agent might recommend, or they might require, I should say, require a film treatment that's like 5 pages, right? The next agent that you might talk to might require a film treatment that's like 25 different pages. And the next agent that you might talk to might require a film treatment that's about a 1 page treatment, basically. And the point of all this, though, is that a lot of times in real life, um, some of the things that we talk about in this class might not be totally 100% applicable. So in other words, sometimes, you have to adapt. So like, for example, what I mean by that is that, like, the agents that we talked to, or that we talked about last week in last week's go-to session, sometimes they require different specifications, right? And the next agent that you talk to might require different specifications. So the point of all this, though, is that in real life, if you guys want to do this for real, and by the way, I'll talk more about, next week, how I've helped a previous student, one of our students, actually help her get her stuff out there. Um, but a lot of times you have to understand that they're going to require different things in real life. Now, for this class, though, the reason, or the main point to get across here tonight, is that we know, Kim and I know, that a lot of times you might have different requirements for different agents, right? But that's okay. But just for the purposes of project two, what you guys need to do is follow the templates that we provide you, right? So those of you that are on the film side, this is one example that we give. And by the way, actually, before I even go on, let me kind of also preface this by saying that sometimes people will ask Kim and I, like, how long does project 2 have to be? And the answer is, well, in real life, sometimes it can be 25 different pages, right? Sometimes it can be 1 page. But just for the purposes of project 2, what you guys need to do here is on average, by the way, there's no like APA requirements, or there's no kind of set standard one way or the other, but most students that do well on project 2 tend to do about, maybe we'll say, like 4 to 5 pages, right? So if that kind of gives you kind of a benchmark to shoot for here. But there is no, like, word requirement or anything like that. It's not like, I know that, Cassie's class that you had last month, she may have had like different word requirements. There's no word requirements for this class, but about on average, the students that tend to get A's tend to do about 4 to 5 pages on this assignment, right? So this is an example. What you're seeing here on the screen is an example of the textbook, obviously, but how to write a film treatment. Now, this is kind of a template that, for those of you that are on the film team, you might want to shoot for, basically, right? So I'll show you an example of a student projects of this in a second here. But basically, though, you want to start off your treatment with a cover page, and you want to definitely have a table of contents here, and you also want to start off the treatment with your biography, right? And you want to kind of give an example of kind of what we call the countermeasures, which is kind of basically just kind of a elevator pitch of your main idea, right? And then you want to have locations. The reason why this part right here is very, very important is because you have to understand that you're going to be sending this to an agent, but also the agent is going to be sending this to potential production people, right? The producers or location people, and they want to know, okay, how much is this going to cost, right? Is this going to be a location, your movie, is this going to take place in an office setting, or is this going to take place in outer space? Because obviously that can add to the budget, right? So you also want to include, in addition to locations, you want to also have character list, and basically, um, one thing that I want to point out with this project. Now, like we talked about last week, Kim and I know that a lot of times you don't have the entire screenplay written, right? And you might not even have the entire treatment written. That's totally fine. The point of this class, though, is to show you how you guys would be going about doing this if you were going to be doing this for real, right? So what you need to do for those of you that are on team film for project 2 is you need to basically explain what happens from start to finish. Like, in other words, you don't necessarily have to have, like, every scene fully drafted or anything like that, but you just need to be able to tell Kim and I what happens from start to finish. So, like, if you want to kind of break this down to acts, because every screenplay basically has 3 acts. If you need to do it by that, that's totally fine, right? Also, for those of you that are maybe not interested in doing a film, but you want to do a TV treatment, this is the format that you would follow, right? And so you would basically do this template, right? So you would have your author name, you would have the title of the show, you would have the format of the show. In other words, is this a reality show? Is this a science fiction show? Things like that, right? And then you would have a log line. Basically, this is a $2 word for an elevator pitch, right? That I know that you guys talked about in either Ron's class or Mike Koch's class, right? For the finance class, right? And then you would also have, for this part, you would have sort of a basic, like I said, tell Kim and I what happens from A to B, or A to Z, I should say. So, like, what happens in your show, right? And one thing I should say too is that a lot of times students will ask, okay, well, like, how many? If I'm doing a TV show, how many episodes will I have to provide? And the answer is basically what we're requiring is 7 for this assignment, right? Just tell us what happens in the first 7 episodes. Now, of course, that some of you are that you might be fans of, like, um, back in the 1990s, Beverly Hills 90210, they had like some kind of ridiculous number of episodes per season, right? They had like 32 episodes, or well, maybe not 30. It was like 20, 28, I think 28 episodes per season, right? And then other shows have just about maybe 12 episodes per season. And basically, though, for this assignment, just give Kim and I the first 7 episodes. In other words, like, what happens from each episode. And you could see here, basically, you don't have to provide tons of detail for each episode, but just kind of give us a basic idea of what happens for each episode in the first 7, right? So that's what you have to do if those of you that are on Team TV, right? And then um, for those of you that are interested in games, this is actually, I have to actually explain this in a little bit of detail here. In the game industry, like if you work for, or if you're ever interested in pitching an idea to EA Games right down here at Orlando, or actually it's in Maitland. But if you're interested in doing that, they might require what's called a game design document. Now, these things are very, very elaborate. Now, Kim and I know that you guys in this, we're only in the second week of the class, right? And we know that some of you might not have like full game design treatments. Um, you might not be able to come up with a game idea in 2 weeks at this point, right? That's totally fine. In real life, if you want to do this for real, you might have to come up with a game design document that's actually going to be like, I mean, some of these things are like 80 to 100 pages or even longer than that, right? But that's okay for this class. You don't actually have to come up with an 80 to 100 page document, right? But what we do ask for those of you in the game team, that we do ask you guys to come up with a game treatment. So basically, this is kind of like just what we went over before with the television treatment and a film treatment, right? So you don't have to come up with like an extensive, elaborate kind of 80-page document, but just tell us what happens in your game, right? So let me go back to this. So tell us the primary goals of the game. Like, also, do you think that this game would be suitable for, like, uh, like consoles, like, PlayStation or Nintendo Wii U or whatever it might be, or is this going to be a game that is going to be, more suitable for like a PC or something like that? So just tell us kind of the basic idea for your game, right? So tell us the primary goals, the design, um, overview with a little bit more detail, right? The basic concept of the game, the background story, the gameplay, things like that, the planned interface, right? Oh, and also, how difficult is the game? This is actually, believe it or not, for agents, this is actually one of the most important things that they actually take into consideration. They want to know, how difficult is this game? In other words, is this going to be a game that is suitable for like kids, young kids that play this on the Wii U, or is this going to be more kind of an adult game, right? So also, how long will it take the average player to compete? Other aspects of the game, is this going to be, so listing characters, is this going to be a single or multiplayer game, right? Um, is this going to be based on, a different, like some kind of other movie, things like that. But the point though, before I even go further and before I show you some student examples, the point that I would really want to get across with all of this though, is that if you really want to do a great job for Project 2, in other words, if you really want to impress Kim and I, um, you can do that by providing a lot of detail. In other words, we provide you some templates here, some different examples, and I'm going to show you some examples too. But I mean, basically though, the students that do really well on Project 2 are the ones that can provide a lot of detail to their projects, okay? So those of you that are on team books, basically what you have to do for this assignment is, again, follow this format that we give you guys, right? So the first thing is you want to provide basic kind of an overview of your project. Again, this is kind of the $2 a word for elevator pitch that you guys had with Mike's class before for the finance class, right? So this is kind of the elevator pitch, the overview. You want to include your target audience. You want to include information about yourself. Competitive titles. By the way, this does not have to necessarily relate to books. So what I mean by that is, like, sometimes students will have a book idea and it might be about vampires, right? So the obvious answer, you would say, well, like, um, the Twilight books might be good examples, but you can actually use this portion of this assignment to your advantage, because you can say, hey, well, the Twilight books might be my competitor, or the Twilight movies might be my competitor, but actually, this is so it's competitors, but actually this is one of my greatest strengths, because you could say that, hey, look at the Twilight books, look how successful they are. This is actually the competitive titles. You think of them as your competitors, but actually this can be your greatest advantage. You could say, hey, look, I'm not competing with the Twilight movies, but look how popular they are. That shows a sort of hunger for this type of material, right? So this part right here, competitive titles, first of all, it does not have to be books necessarily. So it can be movies, it can be music, or even games, things like that. But also, though, don't view this section right here, the competitive titles, as being your competitor necessarily, because you can actually use this for agents to tell them how successful other works in this genre are, and you can use that to your advantage. But anyways, though, getting back to, getting back to the assignment. So competitive titles, you will also want to include, your marketing and promotion details, right? Now, also, this is one of the reasons why we have these go-to sessions. This is actually one of the reasons why this is very, very important to do, because you can always tell every month, we can always tell the students that go to these sessions and the students that don't go to these sessions, right? And the students that don't go to these sessions are always confused about this part, right? This idea of detailed table of contents. Now, for this class, once again, Kim and I are not asking you to, write an entire book during this month, or entire screenplay, or come up with a video game, or come up with a music project. We know that this is just kind of, a 4-week class, basically. So for this section, you don't actually have to come up with a detailed table of contents. You can actually basically list, and let me type this in here. You can basically do this, right? Chapter 1, introduction, right? Chapter 2, why this topic is important, why this topic is significant, right? Chapter 3, the history of this topic, or something like that, right? The history of this topic. So something like this, right? So so Kim and I are not expecting you guys to have, a fully drafted book or a film or something like that, but you have to know at least enough about your topic to be able to come up with some type of table of contents. So it could actually literally be chronologically done, or it could actually be thematically done. It doesn't matter. I mean, so like, for example, let's just say that I was going to do a book on Martin Scorsese, right? Which is basically what my thesis was on, right? So I could organize this by chronologically. I could say, chapter 1, the 1970s, right? And then at that point, I could talk about, Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. So things like that, right? So I actually could arrange this by chronologically, by the decade, or I could also do something thematically, right? So if I was going to do this, I could do, Martin Scorsese, and I could do a whole thing on, chapter 1. Importance of food, right? I could do a whole thing on chapter 2. I could do a whole thing on importance of religion, right? And so I could go on and on about this, but the point though that we're talking about though is that for project 2, you guys on team books or team film, you don't have to come up with an entire, screenplay or entire novel, but you just have to be able to tell us in the detailed table of contents, what is the significance of your project. And then the last thing too, again, this is another example of why these go-to sessions are really, really important, is that this, let me highlight this, sample chapters, you do not, and let me repeat that, you do not have to have sample chapters for this project. You can literally write, and look at my screen here, you can literally write something like this. Sample chapters would go here. So let me highlight that, right? So in other words, you do not have to provide sample chapters for this assignment, okay? So actually, let me look here at the chat box. Vanessa says, "Oh, okay. So Vanessa, good question. Okay, so oh, and actually, you know what? Vanessa, we're actually gonna cover the music side here in a second here. So that's actually a very good question. In fact, let's talk about that right now, and I'll tell you about what blurbs are and things like that. So those of you on the music side actually will be doing this assignment, right? This is an example of a press kit. Now here's the thing. This is where sometimes people will ask Kim and I, like, can I actually do something that I've done before? And the answer is absolutely. You can if you want to, right? So in other words, if you've done a music project before, if you're part of a band or you've helped out a different band, you absolutely can kind of reuse that assignment. The only requirements, though, is that you have to follow our format here. And by the way, Kim's worked with a lot of different music artists in the past, and this is kind of a basic format, kind of a template that she gives you. And but let me kind of give you let me give you guys an example of what's happened in the past. Sometimes students will give us like brilliant press kits for their project too, right? And they don't get a perfect grade, and they come back and they say, like, I don't understand, like, my press kit was absolutely fantastic. And what Kim and I have said is, like, you're completely correct. I mean, your press kit was really impressive, but they were missing like one thing right here. Like, they were missing, what Vanessa just said, blurbs or something like that, right? So what we kind of ask students to do for project 2 is that you're definitely able, if you want, to use like previous material. Um, just like, for example, those of you on the film team, if you have a screenplay that you want to use for project 2, that's totally fine if you want to do a treatment. The only thing that we require, though, is that you kind of make sure to cover all these various things in the examples that we give you. So for example, on the music side, what we require you guys to do is to go ahead here and I mean, actually, the first thing, the cover letter, you don't have to worry about this, right? The cover letter, because you guys pretty much did that for project 1. I mean, that's kind of the query letter, right? The cover page also, you don't really have to worry about that, um, because you kind of basically cover that in your cover page if you're doing an EPK, or if you're doing, if you're submitting this in real life, you want to make sure to have a good cover page, all right? You want to make sure to have a band bio or artist page. And the point that I should say here with this point, the band bio or artist bio page, is just to make sure to go ahead here and have a bio for each particular band member. You want to have photos. Now, by the way, again, another reason why these go-to sessions are very important. You see where it says here 8x10 black and white. That's actually kind of obsolete. That was kind of the standard about maybe 5 or 7 years ago. But basically, at this point, you don't have to have 8 by 10 black and white photos. Just as long as you have photos in general, that's totally fine. Um, this next point I really want to emphasize because, again, this is where the level of specificity and the level of detail really comes into play. Sometimes students will say, like, on this point, well, you know, I'm part of a band and I'm just going to have, a microphone and a guitar or something like that. That that's not what Kim and I are looking for. We want to know the specifics, right? So I mean, like you could say, for example, Slash or um, or Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine. You could say that well, they just have a guitar. Well, that's not really accurate. They have different different guitars that they play on every show that they do, basically. So we just want to know a little bit more detail here about your equipment and things like that. The booking page. So just include your contact information there, your demo CD. By the way, again, we know that you might not have this for real. That's totally fine. So all you would do for project 2 is you would do this. Demo CD / maybe songs would go here. So you literally do not have to actually do a demo CD. Like, again, we know this is only a 4-week class, so we're not expecting you to have a full project. The point of this class is to show you guys how you would go about doing this when you do have it for real, right? And then you would also have a song list, but again, you can literally put, if you don't have a song list, you can literally put, this song list would be here, right? Lyric sheets, not required. If you want to include that, if you do have any kind of lyrics for real and you want some feedback on those, that's totally fine. But I think this is what Vanessa was asking about though. Newspaper clippings. And what we call blurbs for the marketing strategy. You do not actually have to have these for real. But here's the thing though. What a lot of students don't realize is that if you have like a band and you have a Facebook page, um, the newspaper clippings, what we're talking about here, right here, the newspaper clippings, this can actually be testimonials. This can actually be fan comments, right? If you have a Facebook page and people write down great things about your band, you can actually include those with the newspaper clippings. And the other thing to say about this too is that this can actually be a little bit hypothetical, right? So, if you want to put like, um, NYT says that Vanessa is one of the something like this, right? If you want to be a little bit hypothetical, that's totally fine. The only thing that Kim and I ask though is that you don't kind of exaggerate, So in other words, you don't say like, Lamont is, sold out the Amway Center every single day for the last 365 days or something like that, right? So don't exaggerate, but it's totally okay if you want to be a little bit hypothetical, right? And then also the last point though on this, before I show you guys some student examples here, is that and actually before I continue, Vanessa, does that answer your question about the blurbs? Um, yeah, so exactly. So Vanessa, what you just said, are these the comments that would appear in a trailer? Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that's exactly right. But I mean, if you want to be a little bit more elaborate with that, like if you want to do like reviews, that in other words, if some critic or whatever reviewed your work, um, and they provide a little bit more detail that's other than a blurb, that's totally fine. Yeah. So yeah, exactly, Vanessa, exactly. Okay, and then the before I show you some student examples here, let me point out at this point again. This is one of the examples of how um, going to these go-to sessions are really really important, because this point right here, the band business card. Again, we don't expect that you have this done already, and that's totally fine. You know, you're not going to be penalized for that. But just give us an example if you can, in a keynote presentation or something like that. Like if you can include a slide basically that shows what your business card would look like, or even basically, even if you just kind of explain that, that's totally fine, right? Um, just kind of give us an example of what that would look like, right? And by the way, we're not going to go through this right now, but I mean, if you're interested in going through this in more detail before you do project two, these are some of the examples, or actually, this is right from the textbook. So this gives you a little bit more detail about what you need to do for all these things. But okay, and um, and also, by the way, this is not required for project two, but if you are interested in doing this for real, we have an examples of what is a press release and what makes a good press release and what is kind of a not so good press release. So we have this in our appendix if you want to take a look at that. And then, so Kim has some other examples if you want to take a little bit more look at that. But let's go through here some student examples, right? So let me first of all show you guys an example of a video game treatment. And this is a student from a couple months ago, and you can look here. I changed his name just for anonymous purposes. So so his name's taken off here, but basically though, he goes into a lot of detail about the game, right? And he really impressed me with the level of knowledge that he showed about the video game industry and about the project itself, right? So he talked about the game. The one point that I would say with this example, though, let me kind of narrow this down a little bit. Okay, so the one sort of to nitpick this a little bit is, technically speaking, this is the name of the game. You want to make sure to put any kind of titles in italics, right? So it would look like this, technically speaking, right? But I mean, overall, this is a really good job of project two, right? So he actually if we go through this here, he takes a look here at the game description, right? The game description, He goes through the background story, the tone of the game, the narrative, the heart of the game, the objective. He goes through the characters, the multiplayer options, the world, the controls. I mean, really, really nice job here. The sounds, the music, things like that, right? So really, really good job. So let me show you another example here of the music industry, right? Now, this first part right here, um, this student did not have to do the first part, right? You know, the query letter, because that's basically what you guys did for project 1, right? But so the student though gives a really good, they give pictures, and he goes through the equipment, and this is kind of an example of what I was talking about before. It's one thing if you're going to be talking about, like, I'm a guitar player, and so all I have is a guitar and a microphone, right? But this is an example of how this student goes into a lot of detail about how, the specifics of the equipment. And I mean, you can just look at this and see how impressive that is. And they talk about their booking page. Remember, for those of you on the music side, remember to include this. They have a song list, press clips, example of a business card. Remember, you don't have to have this for real, but just kind of show like what you think that it would look like, right? Okay, also, for those of you on the book side, let me show you this. Again, this is an example, a student from a couple months ago, actually. Now, one of the things that she did, again, this is just to nitpick this. I mean, this is a really good example of project 2, like how you would go about doing this. But just to nitpick this a little bit, technically speaking, you see right here when I'm circling, you need to put titles in italics, right? So it would look something like this, right? But I mean, she does a really nice job here of explaining the magazine. So she talks about, like, this is developed for artists and those interested in the arts, and this magazine will be available in digital format. So also too, let me point this out too. I should have mentioned this before, but one of the things that you want to do for project 2 and now also project 3 is that you don't want to use the first person, if that makes sense. So in other words, like right here, where she says my writing style, technically you would do something like this, like you know, Lisa's writing style or something like that, right? It sounds crazy, but that's how they expect it in the professional, the business world, right? They expect you to use the third person. But she talks about, like, competitive titles. Once again, just to nitpick this a little bit, I know that she puts it here in bold, but technically this should actually be in italics, right? She does a nice job here of talking about marketing and promotion. Now, this is different because I know that in the example that we give you guys for books, it is based on kind of a table of contents, right? So you need to kind of go through and explain, what happens from chapter to chapter. But here's a case where this is based on a magazine, so she doesn't really, she can't really do a table of contents, but she points out that in every, issue, this is what happens, right? And then exactly what I told you before, she doesn't have sample chapters. She just says see attached, right? That's what you guys can do for project 2. You don't actually have to have sample chapters, right? Okay, so I think that we've covered pretty much everything. Um, Before I close this, are there any questions? And by the way, if you do have any questions, just feel free to send Kim and I an email. And obviously, you on campus students, I guess I'll see you tomorrow, tomorrow morning. But if there's any questions that you guys have at all about anything, just go ahead and feel free to send Kim and I an email. Okay, so if there's no questions, I will go ahead here and thank Elisa, Christine, Henry, Lamont, Martina, Mike, and Vanessa for attending. And I guess I'll see you guys same time next week, right? Same time, same place. So I wish you guys a good rest of the evening, and I look forward to talking with you guys next week, right? And by the way, Mike, yeah, thank you too. And yeah, you guys did a really, really great job on the on that first project. Like, I was really, really impressed. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead here and close this off, but I'll see everybody again next week, same time, same place, and we'll talk to you then. All right.